You know, if you ask anyone about the dot-com crash back in 2000, they'll probably give you the same story. That it was a necessary correction, right? A much-needed reality check for a tech world that was just drunk on crazy ideas and hubris. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the lessons we all think we learned from that crash were actually completely wrong? Okay, let's get into it.
It is so hard to capture just how nuts the late 90s were. This was way beyond optimism. It was like an 18-month-long gold rush. Just look at that chart. The Nasdaq basically went vertical, peaking at over 5,000 in March of 2000. You had people trying to pay for $1,000 dinners with startup stock, and sometimes it actually worked. I heard a story about one grad student who was supposedly running 6 different companies at the same time. It was a world where just slacking a .com on your company name could double its value overnight. Total insanity was the new normal.
And then, just like that, the party was over. The Nasdaq, that soaring rocket ship, just came crashing down. By October 2002, it had lost nearly 80% of its value. And this wasn't just seen as a market downturn, it was treated like some kind of moral judgment on the entire decade, a punishment for all that wild optimism. It was like the future had been officially canceled.
So here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to relive the party at its peak. Then, we'll unpack the so-called lessons that came out of the big hangover that followed. After that, we'll get into why those lessons are actually pretty flawed and explore a really contrarian idea, that competition is for losers. And finally, we'll look at the lies businesses tell themselves and us to hide what's really going on.
All right, let's start by jumping right back into the bubble. And to really get the vibe, there's no better case study than a company that was born right in the middle of all the madness, PayPal.
So PayPal's mission was absolutely huge. They wanted to create a brand new currency for the internet. But their first idea? Beaming money between Palm Pilots? Oof, total disaster. It was actually voted one of the worst business ideas of 1999. So they pivoted to sending money through email. But to get people on board, they did something completely wild. They just paid people. You got $10 to join and another 10 for every friend you referred. This, as you can imagine, led to insane and incredibly expensive growth. They were just burning through cash, so they had to race to raise more, and they managed to close a massive $100 million round right as the bubble was peaking. That last-minute money saved them.
Okay, so after the crash, everything changed. A new, much more careful mindset took over. The survivors looked at all the wreckage and came up with a new set of rules, a new dogma, really, to make sure a disaster like that would never ever happen again.
And these 4 ideas basically became the new gospel for startups. First, only make small, incremental changes. Big, grand visions were now seen as dangerous. Second, stay lean and flexible, which really just became code for being totally unplanned. Third, don't try to create a whole new market. Just make a slightly better version of what your competitors are doing. And fourth, focus only on your product because, hey, if it's really that good, it won't need sales or marketing, right?
Now, all of this sounds pretty sensible. It sounds safe. But what if this conventional wisdom is actually a trap? What if the complete opposite of these new rules is actually closer to the truth?
Let's just flip the script here. The dogma says to take small, safe steps. But the contrarian truth? It's way better to risk being bold than it is to just accept being trivial. Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one at all.
Then there's this idea that being lean means not having a plan. Just iterate, right? But the truth is, a bad plan is so much better than no plan. You need a map. You need a direction. Just wandering around hoping you'll stumble into something isn't a strategy. And oh boy, this is a big one. The dogma tells you to look at your competition and just do it a little bit better. But the contrarian truth is that competitive markets are a nightmare. They're a war where the only real casualty is profit. And finally, this myth that a great product just sells itself, it's so dangerous. The truth is, sales and distribution are every bit as important as the product itself. The world is absolutely full of brilliant inventions that no one's ever heard of. So let's go deeper on that third point, because it's the most radical of all. Let's really unpack why your goal shouldn't be to win the competition, but to escape it completely and build a monopoly. Okay, this slide says it all. In 2012, look at the entire US airline industry. They brought in $160 billion in revenue, but their profit per passenger? 37 cents. Not $37, cents. Their profit margin was less than 1%. Now look at Google. They made less revenue, $50 billion, but they kept 21% of it as profit. And here's the real kicker.
Google, just one company, was worth 3 times more than every single US airline combined. Airlines create a lot of value for people, but the competition is so fierce they can't capture any of it. Google creates value and captures it.
This is what your Econ 101 textbook calls perfect competition. It sounds nice, doesn't it? Perfect? Well, it's a terrible place to be for a business. It's a world where everyone sells pretty much the same thing, and any profits get immediately swallowed up by new guys coming in and driving prices down. It's a total race to the bottom.
Now, the opposite of that is a monopoly. And I'm not talking about illegal, strong-arm tactics. We're talking about a company that is just so good at what it does that nobody else can even offer a close substitute. Just think about it. Who is Google's actual competitor in search? They're not in the competition war anymore because they won it years ago.
You know, we have this idea that all businesses fall along some kind of smooth spectrum. But the reality is a lot more black and white. A business is either stuck in brutal, soul-crushing competition, or it's a monopoly. That space in between is way smaller than you think.
And because that difference is so extreme, companies on both sides of the chasm have a huge incentive to lie about their situation, not just to us, but to themselves.
A monopolist lies to protect itself, usually from regulators. And this is how they do it. We all know Google has a monopoly on search, right? But when they have to talk about it publicly, they say, oh, us? We're just in the $495 billion global advertising market. Or they'll say they're a multifaceted tech company. They define their market as this gigantic union of a bunch of huge markets, which makes them look like a tiny, harmless fish in a massive ocean. And the businesses stuck in competition? Well, they tell the opposite lie. They're desperate to convince themselves and their investors that they're unique. So they define their market in this absurdly narrow way. They're not just a restaurant in Palo Alto. No, they're the only British food restaurant in Palo Alto. It's a story that makes them feel special, when in reality, they're competing with every single other place you could possibly get lunch.
Here's the monopoly lie, right out in the wild. This is Google's chairman in front of Congress. An extremely competitive landscape. A multitude of options. I mean, it's just perfectly crafted language to paint a picture of a company that's just barely scraping by.
But let's just translate that from PR speak into plain English, shall we? What he's really saying is, hey, nothing to see here. Google's just a tiny player. We are not the monopoly you're looking for. It's basically a Jedi mind trick for regulators.
So what's the takeaway from all this? It means that the dogma we all inherited from the dot-com hangover, it taught us to be afraid of big plans and to avoid creating monopolies. And that might just be the worst advice ever. The most contrarian thing you can do isn't just to do the opposite of the crowd. It's to tune out all the noise, to actually think for yourself. And that leads to one really important question. What valuable company is nobody building? That's the question. That's the one that cuts through all the noise about competition and all the lies companies tell. It's the question that forces you to look for a secret, a new frontier, a way to go from 0 to 1. Because that, right there, is where true lasting value is actually created.